Every case hides a secret. Every secret leaves a clue. Join us as we uncover mystery, one piece at a time.
Miss Marple and a Silent Scream. Chapter 1. The House Where No One Heard Anything, St. Lost. Merry Mead was usually a place where even the fall of a teaspoon was noticed by at least 3 elderly ladies, and reported, improved, and repeated by luncheon. So when Miss Marple received an invitation to Blackthorn Hall, a quiet country house just beyond the village of Linford Vale, she found the wording rather curious. It was not an invitation to tea. It was not even a social call. It was a request. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, widow of the late Sir Edmund Ashcombe, had written in a shaky but elegant hand, "My dear Miss Marple, I should be most grateful if you would come to Blackthorn Hall for the weekend. I am afraid something quite dreadful is going to happen, and I cannot persuade anyone to take me seriously. Trouble is, you see, I heard a scream last night, but nobody else did." Miss Marple read the note twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it into her knitting basket. "Scream that nobody heard," she murmured. "How very interesting." Blackthorn Hall was a handsome old house, with ivy at the windows, a cold stone terrace, and long corridors where footsteps seemed to hesitate before they reached the walls. Miss Marple arrived on a grey Friday afternoon, carrying a small suitcase and a ball of pale blue wool. Lady Beatrice met her in the drawing-room. She was a thin, nervous woman of nearly 70, with bright eyes and a manner that suggested she had spent much of her life apologising for being right. "I know it sounds foolish," Lady Beatrice said, "but it was not a dream. I heard a woman scream. Terrible scream. Short, sharp, and then silence." "And where did it come from?" asked Miss Marple gently. Lady Beatrice glanced toward the window. "From the old nursery wing." The old nursery wing had been shut for many years. No one used it now except Mrs. Trent, the housekeeper, who kept linen in one of the cupboards. The family said it was damp. The servants said it was unlucky. Miss Marple knew that when people called a part of a house unlucky, it often meant something had once happened there and no one wished to talk about it. Weekend guests had already gathered. It was Lady Beatrice's nephew, Julian Ashcombe, handsome, charming, and rather too quick to laugh. He would inherit Blackthorn Hall after his aunt's death, though he spoke of the estate as if it were already a burden bravely placed upon his shoulders. There was his sister, Celia Harrow, a pale young widow with restless hands and a soft, injured voice. She claimed she could never sleep in old houses. There was Dr. Lionel Avery, the family doctor, quiet and watchful, with the polished calm of a man who had heard many secrets and kept most of them. There was Miss Ruth Dacre, Lady Beatrice's companion, a severe woman with a neat grey dress, sharp spectacles, and the air of someone who disapproved of emotions except her own. Finally, there was Felix Dane, a theatre producer from London, who had come to discuss selling some old family letters that belonged to the Ashcombes. He seemed amused by everything, especially the fear of others. Dinner. Lady Beatrice mentioned the scream. The reaction was immediate. Julian laughed. Celia shivered. Miss Dacre pursed her lips. Dr. Avery suggested indigestion. Felix Dane said, "Old houses always screamed a little, especially when they had secrets." Only Miss Marple said nothing. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Miss Marple sat by her bedroom fire and knitted. 11:30, she heard a faint sound in the corridor. Not a scream, a whisper. Then a soft click, like a door closing very carefully. The next morning, the old nursery wing was found open. Inside, on the dusty floor, lay a small ivory button. Beside it, drawn through the dust by an unsteady finger, were 4 words, "I heard her too." Chapter 2. The nursery wing. Message in the dust upset everyone, though not everyone showed it in the same way. Lady Beatrice went quite pale, and had to sit down. Celia began to cry softly into a handkerchief. Julian declared it a foolish joke, and said servants were not what they used to be. Miss Dacre said sharply that the servants at Blackthorn Hall were perfectly respectable, and that she would not have them blamed without evidence. Dr. Avery bent down to examine the writing. "Could have been made at any time," he said. Miss Marple looked at the floor. "Oh no," she said mildly. "The dust is disturbed at the edge. Someone wrote it last night." Julian looked annoyed. "My dear Miss Marple, surely you are not suggesting there is something sinister in a bit of childish scribbling?" "Childish things are not always innocent," said Miss Marple. That remark produced an uncomfortable silence. The old nursery wing contained 3 rooms, the nursery itself, an adjoining bedroom, and a small schoolroom where faded maps still hung on the walls. The air smelt of damp wood, old cloth and lavender. On a shelf stood a row of broken toys, a wooden horse with one leg missing, a cracked doll, and a tin soldier without a head. Psst! Miss Marple noticed that the window catch in the schoolroom had recently been touched. The dust around it had been wiped away by fingers. Beneath the window, outside on the narrow gravel path, there was one clear footprint. Not a man's boot, a woman's shoe, Mrs. Trent, the housekeeper, insisted that no one had entered the nursery wing for weeks. When Miss Marple gently asked about the room's history, Mrs. Trent became uneasy. "Closed after Miss Clara died," she said. "Miss Clara?" asked Miss Marple. Lady Beatrice, who had entered quietly behind them, answered in a strained voice. "My younger sister, Clara Ashcombe. She died when she was 19. "How sad," said Miss Marple. "It was a long time ago," said Lady Beatrice. People often used that phrase when the past was still standing directly behind them. Luncheon, the atmosphere grew worse. Felix Dane made matters no easier. "I have always found family tragedies wonderfully dramatic," he said, buttering a roll, "especially when no one agrees on what really happened." Julian snapped at him. "You were invited here about the letters, Dane, not to entertain yourself with our private affairs." Felix smiled. "My dear fellow, private affairs are so rarely private." Miss Dacre dropped her spoon. It made a small, sharp sound against the plate. Miss Marple noticed that Celia was watching Dr. Avery, not Felix. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked in the garden with Lady Beatrice. The old lady was trembling slightly. "Miss Marple," she said, "I must tell you something. Clara did not die in that nursery wing. She threw herself from the terrace." "But the scream came from the nursery wing?" "Yes. And the message said someone else heard it too." Lady Beatrice nodded. "I have been afraid for years that Clara did not die by accident, and now I think someone wants me to know the truth before I die." Miss Marple looked across the lawn to where Julian stood speaking angrily to Felix Dane. "Or," she said softly, "someone wants you to think so." That evening, Lady Beatrice announced that she had altered her will. No one spoke for several seconds. Paused. Then Julian laughed again. But this time the laughter had no warmth in it. Chapter 3. The Woman in the Passage. By Sunday morning, Blackthorn Hall had lost all appearance of a peaceful country house. Doors opened too quickly. Conversations stopped too suddenly. People who had once complained of boredom now found themselves very alert indeed. The change in Lady Beatrice's will caused a stir. She had not given details, but everyone understood the meaning. Julian might no longer inherit everything. Celia might receive more. Miss Dacre, who had served Lady Beatrice for 15 years, might be remembered generously. Even Mrs. Trent, the housekeeper, could not hide her interest. Felix Dane seemed delighted. "Thrilling," he said. "A new will, a locked wing, a mysterious scream, and a dead sister. One added a body. It would be almost too perfect." Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. One should be careful what one adds, she said. That afternoon, a storm rolled over the hills. Rain struck the windows and the house grew dim before tea. Dr. Avery advised Lady Beatrice to rest in her room. Miss Dacre took her upstairs with the fussiness of a woman who enjoyed being necessary. At 5:30, the lights went out. There was a little confusion, a few startled cries, and Julian's irritated voice demanding candles. Then from somewhere above came a sound. Not loud, not long. A faint choking cry. Miss Marple rose at once. By the time candles were lit, and everyone reached the upper corridor, Lady Beatrice's bedroom door was open. Dacre stood inside, white-faced. Lady Beatrice was lying on the floor beside her writing desk. She was alive, but barely conscious. Beside her lay a broken teacup. Dr. Avery examined her quickly. His face was grave. "Poison," he said. The word changed the house entirely. No one was allowed to leave. Inspector Graves from the county police arrived within the hour, wet from the rain, and not pleased to find Miss Marple already seated calmly by the fire. "Ah," he said, "you again. How nice to see you too, Inspector." Inspector Graves questioned everyone. Miss Dacre had brought Lady Beatrice tea, but insisted she had left it untouched on the desk. Celia said she had been in her room with a headache. Julian had been in the library looking for candles. Felix Dane claimed he had been in the hall enjoying the drama. Dr. Avery had been in the drawing room with Miss Marple when the lights failed. Mrs. Trent said something odd. During the darkness, she had seen a woman in the upper passage. "Woman?" asked Inspector Graves. "Yes, sir, in a pale dress, moving toward her ladyship's room. Celia was wearing pale blue. Miss Dacre was wearing grey. Lady Beatrice herself had a white shawl." But Mrs. Trent shook her head. "No, sir, it wasn't any of them." "Then who was it?" Mrs. Trent swallowed. "It looked like Miss Clara." That caused a great deal of irritation from Inspector Graves, and a great deal of silence from everyone else. Miss Marple asked one question. "Was the woman walking quickly?" Mrs. Trent frowned. "No, ma'am. Slowly, as if she knew exactly where she was going." Lady Beatrice recovered enough to whisper one sentence before falling asleep. "She came back," she said. "Tss." In the writing desk, Inspector Graves found an unfinished letter addressed to Miss Marple. The first line read, "I have remembered what happened the night Clara died." The rest of the page was blank. Chapter 4, The Wrong Ghost. Lady Beatrice survived the poisoning, but she was too weak to speak clearly. Dr. Avery kept her under observation, and Inspector Graves kept everyone under suspicion. Miss Marple spent the morning in the drawing room, knitting a small blue scarf and listening. People always revealed more when they thought an elderly lady was not important. Julian told Celia that their aunt was becoming impossible. Celia replied that Julian had always been selfish. Miss Dacre told Mrs. Trent that the police were fools. Felix Dane asked Dr. Avery whether poison was a painful way to die. Dr. Avery did not answer. Poison had been in the tea. That much was certain, but the teacup had been broken, and most of the liquid lost. The kitchen staff insisted the tray had been prepared normally. Miss Dacre had carried it upstairs. After that, during the blackout, anyone might have entered Lady Beatrice's room. Miss Marple was interested in the blackout. "Old houses have old wiring," said Julian. "Very true," said Miss Marple. "But old wiring does not usually choose such convenient moments." Inspector Graves later confirmed that a fuse had been deliberately removed. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the nursery wing again. Inspector Graves came with her, partly because he did not trust her, and partly because he had learned from experience that she was usually going somewhere useful. In the schoolroom, Miss Marple examined the faded maps. One of them was slightly crooked. Behind it was a narrow cupboard set into the wall. Inside lay a folded piece of fabric. pale dress. Very old-fashioned. Inspector Graves stared at it. "The ghost," he said dryly. "Not the ghost," said Miss Marple. "Only the wrong ghost. The dress had belonged to Clara Ashcombe. It had been kept in the nursery wing for years. Someone had taken it out recently, and worn it or arranged for it to be seen." "Why?" asked Inspector Graves. "To frighten Lady Beatrice," said Miss Marple. "To frighten someone else." There was also another discovery. In the pocket of the dress was a torn scrap of paper. It contained only 3 words. "Ask the doctor." Inspector Graves immediately suspected Dr. Avery. The doctor admitted that he had known Clara Ashcombe years ago. He had been a young medical assistant then, newly qualified and very much in love with her. Clara's family had disapproved. Shortly afterward, Clara died. "Did she kill herself?" asked Inspector Graves. Dr. Avery looked tired. "That is what everyone said." "And what do you say?" "I say that the dead are often blamed for the convenience of the living." It was a dangerous remark. That evening Felix Dane announced that he had found something among the old Ashcombe letters. He would not say what it was, but he hinted that certain people might pay well to prevent its publication. Julian called him a blackmailer. Felix bowed slightly. "Prefer historian." At 11 o'clock that night, Felix Dane was found unconscious at the bottom of the back staircase, blood on the stone step. In his hand was a torn piece of blue wool. Miss Marple looked down at her knitting bag. Her ball of pale blue wool was missing. Chapter 5. A thread too many. Felix Dane did not die, though for several hours it seemed possible. Dr. Avery treated him, while Inspector Graves grew increasingly grim. Blue wool caused immediate embarrassment. "Appears," said Inspector Graves, "that someone wishes to involve you, Miss Marple." "Yes," said Miss Marple. "Was rather unkind of them." "You take it calmly." "At my age, Inspector, one learns that being accused of murder is less upsetting than badly made tea." Felix, when he regained consciousness, claimed he remembered nothing. He had been going to meet someone who had promised to tell him the truth about Clara Ashcombe. He had received a note. The note had vanished. Julian insisted. Felix had invented the whole story to make himself interesting. Celia said. Julian sounded frightened. Miss Dacre said no decent person would meet a blackmailer at night. Mrs. Trent said nothing at all. Part. Miss Marple noticed that Mrs. Trent's hands shook when Clara's name was mentioned. Miss Marple found the housekeeper in the linen room. "You were here when Miss Clara died, were you not?" asked Miss Marple. Mrs. Trent's face hardened. "Kitchen maid, then." "And you saw something?" "No, ma'am." Miss Marple waited. Silence can be very helpful if one does not hurry to fill it. At last, Mrs. Trent whispered, "I heard Miss Clara crying that day. She kept saying, 'It was not mine, was not mine.' I never knew what she meant." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened slightly. That evening, Lady Beatrice asked to see Miss Marple alone. She was still weak, but her mind was clearer. "I remembered something," she said. "The night Clara died, there was no scream from the terrace. There was silence. That was the terrible thing. A silent scream, her face at dinner. She looked as if she was screaming inside, but no sound came." "What had happened?" asked Miss Marple. Lady Beatrice began to cry. "My father found a letter. He believed Clara had disgraced the family. There was a child, or there was going to be. He said she would be sent away. Clara swore it was not true. Someone had put the letter among her things." "Who found it?" Lady Beatrice closed her eyes. "I don't remember. I only remember my father holding it, before she could say more. Miss Dacre entered with medicine, and the conversation ended." Miss Marple looked at the medicine glass. "Lady Beatrice always take that after dinner." "Doctor's orders," said Miss Dacre. Dr. Free later denied ordering any new medicine. That night, Miss Marple did not go to bed. She sat in a chair by the darkened landing, with her knitting in her lap. 20 minutes past midnight, a figure moved along the corridor. Not quickly, slowly, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Marple watched the figure enter Lady Beatrice's room. Then she heard the soft sound of a drawer opening. A moment later, Miss Marple switched on her torch. The figure turned. It was not Celia, was not Miss Dacre. It was Mrs. Trent, wearing Clara's pale dress. But in her hand she held Julian Ashcombe's signet ring. Chapter 6. The scream that was never heard. By morning, everyone was gathered in the drawing room. Lady Beatrice sat near the fire, pale but alive. Julian stood by the window, angry and defensive. Celia sat with her hands clasped tightly. Miss Dacre looked rigid. Dr. Avery appeared exhausted. Mrs. Trent stood near the door, silent and ashamed. Felix Dane, with a bandage around his head, looked less amused than usual. Inspector Graves turned to Miss Marple. "Well," Miss Marple folded her knitting. "It is really a very sad little story," she said. "Like many sad stories, it began with a young girl who was not believed. Clara Ashcombe had not killed herself because of shame. Years ago, someone had planted a letter in her room suggesting she was secretly involved with a man and expecting a child. Sir Edmund Ashcombe believed it. Clara denied it, but the family, proud and cold, chose scandal over truth. That evening Clara had been seen alive in the nursery wing. Later, she was found dead below the terrace. The important thing," said Miss Marple, "is that nobody heard her scream." Inspector Graves frowned. "She fell." "No," said Miss Marple. "She was already dead, or unconscious when she was thrown. Falling woman screams if she can." Lady Beatrice remembered the silence. That was the silent scream. "The room went very still," Miss Marple continued. "The person responsible years ago had been Julian and Celia's mother, Margaret Ashcombe, now dead. Margaret had feared Clara would inherit money meant for her own children. She forged the letter, destroyed Clara's reputation, and during a quarrel struck her in the nursery wing. Clara fell against the fireplace and died. Margaret and one other person helped move the body to the terrace to make it appear suicide. That other person had been Mrs. Trent. Mrs. Trent began to sob. "I was young," she whispered. "Mrs.," Margaret said. "I'd be turned out with no character." She said no one would believe a kitchen maid. I helped carry Miss Clara. God forgive me, but Mrs. Trent was not the person trying to kill Lady Beatrice," said Miss Marple. Julian looked up sharply. Miss Marple turned to him. "You were." Julian laughed, but it was a poor attempt. "My dear lady, you removed the fuse to create darkness. You put poison in your aunt's tea after Miss Dacre left the tray. You wore Clara's dress first, knowing Mrs. Trent's old guilt would make the ghost story believable. Later, when Felix Dane began hinting about the letters, you struck him on the stairs and placed my wool in his hand to confuse matters." Felix stared. Why would he care about letters concerning a dead aunt? "Because," said Miss Marple, "one of those letters proved that Julian's mother had forged the original accusation against Clara. If Lady Beatrice learned that truth, she might alter her will permanently. Julian feared losing Blackthorn Hall." Celia gave a small cry. "But the ring?" asked Inspector Graves. "Mrs. Trent found it in the nursery wing after Julian wore the dress." She realised the ghost was not Clara. Last night she went to Lady Beatrice's room to hide the ring in her drawer, hoping the truth would come out without her confessing her part in the old crime. Mrs. Trent covered her face. "I was afraid." "Yes," said Miss Marple softly. "Fear makes cowards of many people, but guilt makes very bad liars." Julian's face changed. The charm fell away. Underneath it was something small, cold and furious. "Cannot prove any of this." Inspector Graves held up a small paper packet. "We found poison in your shaving case." Julian said nothing after that. When he was taken away, the room seemed to breathe again. Lady Beatrice looked at Miss Marple with tired eyes. "My sister never screamed," she said. "No," said Miss Marple, "but after all these years, someone heard her." Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight touched the wet windows of Blackthorn Hall. The old nursery wing would never again be called unlucky. It had held a secret, that was all. Secrets, Miss Marple knew, were rather like weeds in a garden. One ignored them long enough. They did not disappear. They merely grew roots.
Like and subscribe our channel. Thank you.